When my son told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, the words didn't just sting, they hollowed me out. It was early December, the air outside was sharp with winter, but nothing cut colder than hearing him say, "Mom, maybe it's better if you stay home this year." "It's complicated with everyone else coming." He didn't even look ashamed when he said it, just glanced at his wife for approval, and she gave that faint, satisfied smile that had haunted me for years. I stood there in their polished living room, surrounded by garlands and ornaments I had once bought when they couldn't afford decorations of their own. The tree sparkled with lights, gifts neatly stacked beneath it. And yet I felt like an intruder, like some unwanted guest begging for scraps of warmth. My own son, my only child, stood before me, taller now, confident, a successful man in his own right. But I couldn't stop seeing the boy who once clutched my hand in the grocery store, asking if Santa would still find us in our tiny, rented apartment. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, as though his words hadn't shattered me. My hands trembled as I picked up my purse from the armchair and slid on my old coat. "Of course," I whispered, "if that's what you want." And before either of them could say another word, I walked out into the biting cold. My car sat parked at the end of their neat suburban driveway. I got inside, closed the door, and gripped the steering wheel with both hands. I could still hear his words, sharp and final, echoing in my skull. Not welcome. Not this year. Not anymore. The engine hummed to life, but I didn't drive. Not yet. I sat there, staring at the glow of their house, every window warm with light. Inside, laughter and comfort. Outside, me, shivering, small. But as the minutes passed, the pain began to shift. It burned hotter, turning into something stronger than grief. He thought he could cut me out so easily. They both thought I was powerless, a burden they could push aside when I no longer fit their picture-perfect life. They had forgotten. They had forgotten who I was, what I had done, the years I had clawed and bled to give him every chance, every opportunity. They had forgotten the sacrifices I made, the dreams I buried, the meals I skipped, the nights I worked until my body nearly broke. They had forgotten that the very walls of that house, the business he bragged about, the car his wife drove, all of it was tied to me. I tightened my grip on the wheel and whispered into the silence of the car. "You think you don't need me anymore? You're about to learn exactly how wrong you are." That night, while the world outside was wrapped in holiday cheer, I sat alone in my modest little house on the other side of town. The tree in my living room was small, the lights dim, the ornaments faded from years of use. But I stared at it and thought of all the Christmases I had scraped together, magic out of nothing for him. The toy train I bought second-hand, but polished until it looked new. The way I used to wrap empty boxes just to make the tree look fuller. The way I sometimes didn't eat so he could have the dinner he wanted. I remembered his tiny face lighting up each year, his voice shouting, "Thanks, Mom! You're the best! Where had that boy gone?" As the memories churned, my anger solidified. No more tears, no more begging for scraps of affection from people who had twisted love into convenience. This was no longer about being invited to Christmas dinner. This was about respect, about dignity, about reminding them that they had built their empire on my back, and if I chose to, I could tear it all down in seconds. I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine and sat at the kitchen table with the old metal filing cabinet I kept tucked away in the corner. Inside were documents, deeds, contracts, receipts, loan agreements. I had always been careful, always kept proof of what I had done for him, proof of just how much of their so-called independence wasn't independence at all. I pulled out the folder that contained the mortgage paperwork. My name stared back at me, bold and undeniable. My son and his wife liked to tell people they bought that house on their own, but I knew the truth. Without me co-signing, without the hefty down payment I had scraped together from years of savings, the bank would have never approved them. And their precious business? The startup loan was mine too. My credit, my name, my signature. The more I read through those documents, the calmer I became. Because for the first time in years, I realized something powerful. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some discarded mother clinging to memories. I was the reason they stood where they were today. And if they wanted to erase me, I could erase everything they took for granted. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake, planning, remembering, sharpening my resolve. Every cruel look his wife had given me, every dismissive word, every time I had been told to sit quietly in the corner of their lives, it all became fuel. I wasn't going to beg them to love me. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at their table. I was going to build my own table, and I was going to make sure theirs collapsed. The next morning, as I poured myself a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my son. "Thanks for understanding, Mum. We'll drop by after the holidays with the kids, okay?" Understanding? He thought I understood? I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign in my empty kitchen. He truly believed I would sit quietly, waiting like some obedient dog for scraps of affection. He had no idea that with one phone call, one document, one decision, I could change everything. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into my online accounts, and began gathering what I needed. Every password, every file, every piece of evidence. This wasn't about money alone. This was about teaching them what happens when you cut out the person who built your foundation. By the time the sun rose higher in the sky, my plan was already forming. It would take patience, precision, and a calm face whenever I saw them again. They would never suspect, not until it was too late. And when the pieces fell, they would remember the one lesson they had forgotten. Never betray the hand that fed you. Because I wasn't just his mother. I was the reason he had anything at all. And I wasn't going to let them forget it. The first step of my plan wasn't to strike. It was to remember, to let every scar, every sacrifice, every moment I gave more than I had, fuel me. Because if I was going to do this, if I was going to remind my son and his wife what I meant, I needed to relive it all. Not just for the anger, for the clarity. I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant with him. His father, charming at first, had already started showing his true colors by then. Reckless, selfish, a man who wanted freedom more than family. When I told him the news, he vanished within a week. No calls, no letters, nothing. Just me, alone, clutching my belly and terrified of what was to come. I could have given up. People told me I should. Friends whispered about adoption, about starting over, about how hard life would be. But the first time I felt him kick, the first time I heard his tiny heartbeat on that scratchy hospital machine, I made a promise to him. I would give him the life I never had, no matter the cost. And the cost was steep. I worked 3 jobs at once sometimes, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, babysitting on weekends. I lived off coffee, ramen noodles, and the rare leftovers people let me take home from the diner. My body ached constantly, my feet blistered, but none of it mattered when I looked at him. When I tucked him into bed at night, when I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You'll never go without. Not as long as I'm here." We lived in a crumbling little apartment, the kind where the walls were thin and the heat barely worked. Winters were brutal. I used to wrap him in layers of blankets and sit awake through the night just to make sure he didn't get too cold. Some nights I pretended I wasn't hungry, so he could have the last piece of bread. He never noticed. He thought it was just how life was. But I knew, and I was proud. Proud of every single scar that came from loving him more than I loved myself. When he grew older, I scraped together enough to move us into a small house. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, peeling paint. But it was ours. I wanted him to feel stability, something solid beneath his feet. I wanted him to know that even if the world turned against him, home would never betray him. And yet here I was, decades later, banished from the very idea of home by the boy I had given everything for. I remembered the school trips I paid for when money was so tight I had to sell my jewelry. The prom suit I rented for him when I couldn't afford to buy. The college tuition forms, the endless late-night shifts so he could walk onto that campus with his head high and no debt weighing him down. He never knew half of it. He never saw me in the kitchen at 2 a.m, counting crumpled bills and coins, praying it would be enough to cover the electric bill. He never saw me cry in the bathroom, silent, so he wouldn't wake and worry. He never saw the pile of rejection letters from jobs I wasn't qualified for but applied to anyway. All he saw was the result. The neat lunches in his school bag, the steady roof over his head, the Christmas mornings with presents waiting under the tree, no matter how small. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe by protecting him from the truth, I raised a man who thought stability just existed, like sunlight, instead of being fought for tooth and nail. Maybe I raised someone who thought he had built his empire alone, when in truth he had been carried every step of the way. The bitterness curled in my chest, but beneath it was a raw ache. Because despite everything, I still loved him. He was my son, my blood, my reason for surviving when life tried to crush me. And maybe that's what hurt the most, that the one person I had protected from the world had grown into the very person who would cast me aside. His wife didn't help. From the moment she entered his life, she made it clear I wasn't welcome. She came from a family with money, with connections, with polished smiles and soft hands that had never scrubbed a floor. I could see the way she looked at me, like I was something beneath her, like I didn't fit the glossy image she wanted to project. But I tolerated her. I bit my tongue, because my son loved her, and because I wanted to believe there was room for me in their world. But over the years, little by little, she chipped away at my place in his life. Snide comments about my clothes, my cooking, my house. Invitations that came later and later, until sometimes I wasn't invited at all. And my son, he defended her. Always her. He told me I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, that she didn't mean it that way. But she did. She meant every word. And now she had won. She had finally pushed me out entirely. And he had let her. That thought ignited something fierce in me. I would not let her erase me. I would not let my own son forget who stood by him when no one else did. If he wanted to choose her world over mine, fine. But I would remind him whose name was written on the very foundation of that world. I sat back in my chair, sipping cold coffee now, and thought of all the leverage I held. The documents, the accounts, the legal ties. I had given him the tools to build, but in doing so, I had also kept the keys. And keys can lock as well as open. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't going to storm into their house and scream about betrayal. That would only make me look weak, desperate. No, my revenge would be quiet, precise. The kind of reminder that leaves a mark so deep it never fades. He had taken Christmas from me, but I was going to take far more from him. As the clock ticked past midnight, I finally closed the folder of papers and placed it back into the cabinet. Tomorrow, I would begin. Slowly, carefully. They would never see it coming. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, because I knew what I was going to do, and I knew they deserved it. The morning after I made my decision, the world outside looked calm, ordinary, as though nothing in it had shifted. But inside me, something had changed forever. I brewed coffee, the bitter smell filling the kitchen, and for the first time in years I didn't feel powerless. I felt sharp, focused, dangerous. I thought back to the very beginning, to when everything between me and my son had started to shift. It hadn't been sudden. Betrayal rarely is. It creeps in slowly, in the quiet ways people take you for granted, in the silences where there should have been gratitude. I remembered the first time I noticed it, years ago, at one of his business dinners. He had just launched his company, the one I helped him secure the loan for. I had worked extra hours to boost my savings, walked into that bank with him, put my name on the line. Without me, those doors would have stayed closed. But when he introduced me to his colleagues that night, he didn't say, "This is my mother, who helped me get here." "Number," he said, "this is my mum. She's retired now, retired." As though my life, my effort, my sacrifice had all been boxed away. Meaningless. I smiled politely, but inside something cracked. Over the years, there were more cracks. Times when he forgot to invite me to birthdays until the last moment. Times when his wife made decisions about the children and I wasn't consulted, though I had practically raised him alone. Times when I became less of a mother and more of a background character in their carefully curated lives. Still, I stayed silent, because love silences you. It makes you swallow hurt and call it patience. It makes you forgive things no one else would. But silence breeds resentment. And by the time he told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, the silence had grown heavy enough to crush me. I thought of the nights I sat up when he was sick, wiping his forehead, holding his hand while he cried. I thought of the years I told myself it would all be worth it, that once he was grown, once he had children of his own, he would understand. But now he was grown. Now he had children. And instead of understanding, he pushed me away. That was when I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just thoughtless. He wasn't just influenced by his wife. He had chosen this. He had chosen to treat me as disposable. I looked again at the papers I had gathered. My name on the mortgage, my name on the business loan, my savings funneled into their lives, disguised as gifts, but in reality, lifelines. I had thought giving him those things would ensure a place for me, a guarantee that I would always matter. But I was wrong. Money doesn't buy love. Sacrifice doesn't guarantee loyalty. And if I wanted respect, I couldn't wait for it to be handed back. I had to take it. The question was how. I considered my options carefully. I could revoke my co-sign on the business loan. That alone would cripple him. Without my backing, the bank could call in debts he couldn't cover. I could also reclaim the car. It was still registered under my name. With one phone call, I could make their shiny SUV disappear. And the house? If they missed even one payment, I had legal grounds to intervene. But those were just the blunt tools. I wanted something sharper. I didn't want to just hurt them financially. I wanted to dismantle the illusion they had built. The illusion that they had done all of this alone. That I was irrelevant. I wanted the world to see the truth. It wouldn't be easy. They were careful with their image. His wife, especially, always made sure their life looked perfect. The holiday photos, the charity events, the polished smiles. But perfection is fragile. All it takes is one crack, and the whole surface shatters. I thought about timing. Christmas was only weeks away. They had uninvited me, left me to spend the holiday alone. But what if, by the time the new year came, their perfect little life was already crumbling? What if the people they wanted to impress most saw exactly how much of their success wasn't theirs at all? The idea made my pulse quicken. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore. It was about precision. I would wait. I would prepare. And when the moment came, I would strike so cleanly they wouldn't even see the blade until it was buried deep. The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from my thoughts. Another text. This one from my daughter-in-law. Just 3 words. Thanks for understanding. Understanding. The arrogance of it made me laugh out loud. She thought she had won. She thought I had accepted my place in the shadows, grateful for whatever crumbs they tossed me. She had no idea that while she was busy polishing ornaments and planning parties, I was sharpening knives in the dark. I didn't reply. Silence would unsettle her more than any words could. Instead, I closed my phone, placed the papers back into their folder, and stood. I walked through my little house, my steps echoing softly. It wasn't grand like theirs. The furniture was worn, the paint chipped. But it was mine. Every inch of it paid for by my own blood and sweat. And it was from here, this modest place, that I would build my revenge. I stopped at the mantel, where old photos of my son as a child still stood. Him in a school uniform too big for his frame. Him holding a birthday cake I had stayed up all night baking. Him sleeping on my chest as a newborn. My throat tightened, and for a moment I felt the old ache of love. But then I remembered his words. Not welcome. And the ache hardened into steel. If he wanted a world without me, I would give him one. But it wouldn't be the world he expected. It would be a world built on the rubble of everything he took for granted. And I would be the one holding the match. The snow had begun to fall the night I decided to set everything in motion. It drifted down in silence, coating the streets, covering every rooftop in a pure white layer that almost mocked me with its stillness. Because inside, in my chest, there was nothing still. There was fire. A fire that had been building for years and now, finally, had a direction. I started small, quietly. I went to the bank the next morning, dressed in my plain winter coat, the same one I had worn for over a decade. Nobody looked at me twice, which was exactly what I wanted. I walked in, sat down with a familiar clerk, and requested updated statements on the accounts and loans connected to my name. She smiled politely, clicked away at her computer, and handed me a neat packet of papers. I slid them into my bag with steady hands, but inside my heart was pounding. This was the map to their undoing. On the way home, I stopped at the small cafe where I used to take my son when he was a boy. He'd always ordered hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and I would let him have it even when we barely had money for both of us. I sat in the corner booth, opened the folder, and spread out the documents like a deck of cards. Mortgage, loan, car, business. Each one tethered to me. Each one giving me power I had never used, until now. I knew I couldn't move too fast. Revenge, real revenge, isn't a sprint. It's a long, measured walk through fire. If I wanted to burn them properly, I needed to choose the right order, the right moment. The house was tempting. Without my support, it would become a weight they couldn't lift. But no, that was too direct, too obvious. I wanted something that would slice deeper, something that would cut pride before comfort. The business. That was the crown jewel of their lives, the thing they flaunted to the world, the reason they held their heads high. He loved to tell anyone who would listen that he had built it from nothing, from the ground up, self-made, a visionary. I used to smile when I heard him say it. Now those words tasted like poison, because I knew the truth. Without me, there would have been nothing. And if I pulled my name from those papers, the truth would come crashing down on him so hard the whole town would see the rubble. But it couldn't just be about pulling support, number. That would make me the villain. I needed to make sure the mask slipped on its own. I needed to make sure people saw them for who they really were before I struck. So I started observing, watching, listening. I went to one of his company's holiday events. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. All I had to do was linger near the entrance, blend in with the crowd of vendors and guests arriving. I watched him stand there, shaking hands, smiling, the perfect picture of success. His wife was beside him, in a glittering dress, laughing too loudly at every joke. They looked untouchable, powerful. But I had been a mother long enough to recognize the little cracks no one else saw, the way his hand twitched when she corrected him, the tightness around her smile when someone else drew attention away from her. The cracks were there. They just needed widening. When they noticed me, standing quietly near the edge of the room, her smile faltered for just a moment. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. I smiled sweetly. I just wanted to see my son. To support him. That's all. He exchanged a look with her, one of those silent conversations couples have when they think no one is watching. She plastered on her polite voice. "Well, it's wonderful to see you, but this is a business event. Maybe next time, call ahead?" I nodded, pretending not to notice the tension in her eyes. "Of course, dear. I wouldn't dream of interrupting." And then I left, disappearing into the night, leaving them to wonder why I had come at all. Because the truth was, I hadn't gone to see them. I had gone to see the people around them, the ones who whispered about them, who speculated about their rise, who doubted but never dared to speak it aloud. People love a success story, but people love a downfall even more. All they need is a push. So I gave it to them, slowly, carefully. I started telling small truths in quiet conversations. Not lies, never lies, just the truth, sprinkled like seeds. That the house wasn't really theirs. That the business had been built on someone else's credit. That not everything was as perfect as it looked. People didn't believe it at first. But then they started to wonder. And wondering is the first step toward doubt. At home, I wrote everything down. Every move I made, every whisper I planted. I wasn't reckless, I was meticulous. And as the days moved closer to Christmas, I could feel the tension building like a storm. I imagined the moment their world would shatter, the moment they would look around and realize the foundation beneath them was gone. I imagined the look on my son's face when he understood who had pulled the ground from under him. And in those dark hours of the night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, "Not welcome. Fine. But you'll wish you had begged me to stay." Snow kept falling heavier as the days rolled on, blanketing the world outside in white. But inside me there was no softness, no purity. Only the sharpening edge of resolve. By now I had rehearsed my plan in my mind 100 times, each step clearer than the last. I didn't want just to cut them off. I wanted them to feel the coldness they had shown me, to taste what it meant to be cast out, unwanted, powerless. That first strike came quietly, without fanfare. I called the dealership where the shiny SUV was leased under my name. The woman on the line, polite and efficient, pulled up the record and confirmed it instantly. Yes, the registration was still under me. Yes, I had the right to revoke authorization. And yes, with a signature and a small fee, the vehicle could be reclaimed by the company. I thanked her sweetly, my voice calm, as if I were scheduling a haircut. Inside, my heart raced. I didn't schedule the pickup immediately. Timing mattered. I wanted the moment to sting, to humiliate. So I arranged for it to happen on Christmas Eve, when their neighbors would be home, when their children would be watching, when the image of them standing in the snow, helpless, while the car was driven away would burn itself into memory. But that was just one piece. The business was next. I pulled out the loan agreements again and traced my finger over my signature. He had been so proud that day, clutching the approval letter as though he had conquered the world. I remembered his grin, the way he hugged me, whispering, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom." How quickly those words had been buried under years of silence. I made an appointment with the bank's loan officer. She was younger than me by at least 20 years, but she treated me with the deference of someone who understood the weight of a co-signer. "Technically," she explained, "you hold authority to make changes to the terms. It would require notifying your son, of course, but..." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. You have more power here than he does. You're the stronger name on this loan. The words sent a chill of satisfaction down my spine. Stronger name. He had forgotten, but the ink on the paper hadn't. I didn't pull the trigger that day. I smiled, took the information, and left. Because I knew when I did, I wanted him to see it coming like a train he couldn't stop. That night, I lay awake in bed and thought about the boy he used to be. How he once begged me not to leave him alone in the dark. How he used to climb into my bed when nightmares kept him awake. How he clung to me at school drop-offs, whispering, "Don't go, Mommy." Now he had grown into a man who told me I wasn't welcome. The cruelty of it twisted inside me, but it no longer broke me. It fueled me. Christmas Eve arrived cold and bright, the kind of winter day where the air itself feels sharp. I stood across the street from their house, bundled in my coat, just another neighbor out for a walk. Through the windows I could see the warm glow of their decorations, the tree glittering, the children laughing. They looked picture perfect, untouchable. But I knew what was about to happen. Right on schedule, a tow truck rolled up the street. It stopped in front of their driveway, lights flashing. I watched as my daughter-in-law rushed outside, confusion turning to panic. She gestured, wildly, her voice carrying across the still air. My son appeared a moment later, his face red with anger, shouting at the driver. The man simply pointed to the paperwork. My paperwork. And then, slowly, methodically, he hooked up the SUV and hauled it away. I'll never forget the look on their faces. My son, furious and helpless. His wife, pale with humiliation, clutching her coat tighter as neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The children, confused, asking why their car was being taken. I turned away before they could see me watching. My heart pounded, my breath came fast. But there was no guilt, only cold, steady satisfaction. It had begun. Later that night, as I sipped tea in my quiet little house, I imagined them inside theirs, the silence heavy after the children were tucked into bed. I imagined her blaming him blaming her, both of them knowing, deep down, that they had underestimated me. And I smiled, because this was just the beginning. The morning after Christmas was eerily silent. I imagined their house without the gleaming SUV in the driveway, imagined the shame that must have crept in as relatives asked questions they couldn't answer. Shame is a powerful seed. It grows in the dark, twisting its roots through everything you try to hide. And I knew by now that seed had been planted. I didn't rush to strike again. Patience was my greatest weapon. Instead, I went about my days as if nothing had changed. I shopped for groceries, I shoveled snow from my walkway, I exchanged polite words with neighbors. On the surface, I was the same quiet woman they'd always known. But inside, every move I made was calculated. On the second day after Christmas, I made a call to an old friend, someone who worked in the local newspaper. We hadn't spoken in years, but back when I was working double shifts at the diner, she used to come in every Friday night and sit at the counter. We had built a small friendship then, sharing stories between her deadlines and my orders. She had always admired my grit, my resilience. When she answered the phone, her voice carried the same warmth I remembered. "It's been so long. How are you?" "I'm well," I said softly, though the truth was far more complicated. I was wondering, are you still writing those business profiles? The ones about local entrepreneurs? She chuckled. "Always. You know, success stories sell." I let a pause hang in the air before I said, "Sometimes, though, the truth sells better." She didn't need much convincing. Reporters are always hungry for cracks in the polished surface of power. I gave her breadcrumbs, not enough to point back to me directly, but enough to spark her curiosity. I told her about businesses built on borrowed names, about people who claimed to be self-made while leaning heavily on others. I gave her just enough that she promised to dig deeper. That was all I needed. A few days later, I stopped by my son's business myself. I didn't announce my arrival. I walked in, wearing the same coat and scarf I always did, blending in with the customers. The lobby was sleek, modern, filled with awards and framed photos of him shaking hands with community leaders. He had built his image well. Too well. When the receptionist looked up and smiled at me, recognition flickered in her eyes. "Oh, you're Mr. Carter's mother, aren't you?" I tilted my head, a small smile on my lips. "Yes, that's me." Her smile faltered for a second, almost uncertain. "He speaks very highly of you." Did he? I doubted it, but I nodded, thanked her, and left without asking to see him. I didn't need to, just my presence there, my face seen, my name remembered. It was another subtle reminder, another whisper. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, I thought back to the day I had co-signed that business loan. He had been so nervous, his hands sweating, his voice shaky. I had held his arm and told him it would be fine, that I believed in him. I had believed in him when no one else did. And now, if I chose to, I could take that belief back. The temptation grew stronger each day. I imagined the letter arriving at his office, the call from the bank, the realization dawning on him that everything he thought was his could vanish overnight. But still I waited. Because the best revenge isn't just about taking, it's about timing. The call from my reporter friend came 2 weeks later. Her voice buzzed with excitement. "You were right. There's more to his story than meets the eye. The paperwork is clear as day. Your name is everywhere. Without you, he wouldn't have gotten a single loan." I closed my eyes, savoring the words. "What do you plan to do?" "I'm running the piece this Sunday," she said. "It'll ruffle feathers, but people deserve to know." I thanked her, keeping my voice calm, though my pulse raced. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the worn wood of my kitchen table. This was it. The mask was about to crack. Sunday came, and the article hit like a storm. The headline was bold: "The Truth Behind Carter Enterprises, the Mother Who Made It Possible." The piece wasn't cruel. It was factual, well-documented, balanced. But in its honesty, it cut deeper than any accusation could. It painted the picture clearly. A man who claimed to be self-made had been lifted, supported, carried on the shoulders of his mother. By noon, the whispers had spread. Calls started flooding his office. Clients, investors, even friends, asking questions, making jokes, raising eyebrows. The golden boy image was tarnished. I knew he would come to me. I knew it was only a matter of time before he showed up at my door, demanding answers, desperate to know why this had happened. And I was ready. Ready to look him in the eyes and make him understand exactly what it felt like to be discarded. As the sun set that evening, painting the snow in shades of pink and orange, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, waiting. The knock at my door came just as the sky turned dark. The knock came hard, hurried, the kind of knock that carried anger barely held back. I set my teacup down slowly, almost ceremoniously, and walked to the door. When I opened it, there he was, my son, red-faced, eyes wild with a mix of fury and desperation. Behind him, his car idled in the driveway, headlights slicing through the snow. "Mom!" he hissed, pushing past me before I could even invite him in. "What the hell did you do?" I closed the door gently behind him, turning with calm I didn't entirely feel. "What do you mean, dear?" He spun on me, waving a folded newspaper in his hand. His knuckles were white. "Don't play games with me. This article, about the business, the loans, the house, this came from you, didn't it?" I let a small smile curl my lips, just enough to unsettle him. "It wasn't from me." It was from the truth. I'm not responsible for what the truth does when it comes out. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. Do you realize what you've done? People are calling me a fraud. They're saying I lied about everything. Do you know how hard I've worked to build my reputation? The laugh that slipped from me wasn't bitter. It was soft, almost pitying. How hard you've worked. Darling, without me, you wouldn't have had the ground to stand on. I didn't ruin your reputation. I simply reminded the world who built it for you. For a moment, he stood frozen, chest heaving, his fury clashing with something else, something like shame. I could see it in his eyes, the flash of the boy he used to be, the boy who once held my hand in fear, but then his pride surged back, drowning it. You had no right, he spat. None. This was my life, my business. You've destroyed everything. I stepped closer, my voice steady, low, cutting through his anger. No right? I had every right. I gave up everything for you, every dream, every comfort, every piece of myself. You don't get to erase me because I don't fit into the glossy picture you and your wife want to show the world. At the mention of her, his face twisted, a flicker of doubt slipping through. Leave her out of this, he snapped, though there was no conviction behind it. I tilted my head, studying him. She's never left me out of anything. She's been pushing me aside since the moment she arrived. And you let her. You chose her silence over my sacrifices. And now you've reaped what you've sown. His hands shook, still clutching the crumpled newspaper. If you keep this up, you'll ruin me. Do you understand? Everything I've worked for— Again I cut him off, this time with steel in my tone. Everything I've worked for, you mean? Don't twist it. You were given a ladder and told the climb was yours. All I've done is kick it away so you can see how high you really stand. Silence stretched between us. His breathing slowed, his fury cooling into something heavier. Fear. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew. Deep down, he knew how fragile his empire was without me holding it steady. Finally, he whispered, Why now? After all these years, why would you do this to me now? I looked at him, really looked at him. The man my son had become, a stranger wearing the face of the boy I once loved so fiercely. And my heart ached, but it did not break. Because you told me I wasn't welcome, because you forgot who I am, and because sometimes the only way to teach a child gratitude is to take away the gifts they've mistaken for entitlements. He swallowed hard, his shoulders sagging. For the first time, he looked small in front of me. Not the confident businessman, not the husband or father, but a boy caught in his own lies. I can fix this, he muttered, almost to himself. I can spin it. I stepped aside, gesturing to the door. Go ahead and try. But know this, I've only begun. If you want to test me, if you want to see how much further I can go, then keep pretending I don't matter. You'll find out just how much of your world is mine to take. He stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for weakness. But he found none. At last he shoved the paper into his coat pocket, stormed past me, and out into the night. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. I leaned against it, exhaling slowly. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just passed. For the first time, he had seen me not as his mother, not as a relic of the past, but as someone with power, and power, once revealed, cannot be unseen. The days after his visit were strangely quiet. He didn't call, he didn't text. Not a word from him, not a message from his wife. I knew why. They were scrambling, trying to patch the cracks that had already begun to spread. Once an image fractures, though, it never looks whole again. And they were learning that the hard way. I kept to myself, going about my routine like nothing had changed. But inside, I was listening, waiting, watching for the ripples. And they came sooner than I expected. At the grocery store one morning, I overheard two women in the next aisle. Their voices carried easily as they whispered over produce. "Did you read that article about Carter Enterprises?" All that bragging, and it turns out it wasn't even his doing. "I know," the other said, chuckling. "Imagine strutting around town like a self-made man when it was his mother's name keeping it all afloat. I wonder how his wife is handling it. She always acted like she was too good for everyone. I didn't linger to hear more. I didn't need to." The whispers had begun, and whispers spread like wildfire. That afternoon I pulled the mortgage documents out again. My name sat there, bold and undeniable, right beside his. They had never told anyone, of course. To the world, they had bought the house themselves. But I knew the truth. Without my savings for the down payment, without my signature, they'd still be renting some cramped apartment. I set the papers aside and stared out the window at the snow drifting lazily from the sky. The SUV was gone, the article was out, their pride was bleeding. But it wasn't enough yet. Not for me. I needed him to face me, not with anger, but with recognition, with respect. And that wouldn't come until the ground under him truly trembled. I thought about the children then. My grandchildren. Sweet, innocent faces, who had hugged me tightly the last time I saw them, asking if I'd come for Christmas. I had smiled through the lump in my throat and told them I'd see them soon. They didn't know their parents had cut me out. They didn't know the cruelty behind the closed doors. A part of me ached for them. They were blameless in all of this. And yet, they were being raised in a house built on lies. If nothing changed, they would grow up believing their father's false story, thinking pride was more important than truth. I couldn't allow that. No matter how painful, I had to make the lesson reach them too. The chance came quicker than I thought. A week later, I received an invitation in the mail, not from my son or his wife, but from the school. My grandson was part of a winter recital, and the families of students were encouraged to attend. I doubted my son had even thought to stop the invitation. It was generic, sent to all relatives listed as emergency contacts. But there was my name, clear as day. I went, not dressed in anything grand, just my simple wool coat and scarf. I sat in the middle row of the school auditorium as children sang and laughed and stumbled through their lines. And when my grandson stepped forward, small and proud, I felt tears sting my eyes. For a moment all my anger melted, and all I saw was family, the one thing I had wanted all along. But then I caught sight of them, my son and his wife, sitting 2 rows ahead, stiff as statues when they noticed me. Her eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. They hadn't expected me. They didn't want me there. When the recital ended, I stood to leave before they could approach. But my grandson saw me. He ran into the aisle, his little voice calling, "Grandma!" and he threw his arms around me. The room hushed for a heartbeat as parents glanced over, curious. I knelt down, hugging him tightly, whispering, "You did so well, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." And then, with everyone watching, my daughter-in-law appeared, her face burning with forced politeness. "Mother," she said sharply, "we didn't know you were coming." I stood slowly, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I was invited, and I'll always be here to support my grandchildren." She clenched her jaw, glancing at the parents nearby who were already whispering. She couldn't make a scene. Not there. Not with so many eyes on her. She forced a smile, but her voice dripped venom. Of course. My son didn't say a word. He couldn't. Not without admitting what he had done to me. He just looked at me, a storm brewing behind his eyes before turning away. I left the school with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from victory. They could push me out of their home, but they couldn't erase me from their children's lives, not without exposing themselves, and the more they tried to hide, the more the truth would come crawling back into the light. That night I wrote a letter, not to him, not to her, to my grandchildren. I didn't tell them everything, they were too young for that. But I told them stories about their father when he was their age, about how I worked hard to give him everything, about the love that never wavered, even when times were hard. I sealed the letter and tucked it away, knowing one day when they were old enough to understand, they would read it, and they would know the truth. The next morning I got another call. This one wasn't from family, or the bank, or even the newspaper. It was from one of his investors, a man whose voice I recognized instantly, someone who had shaken my hand at that first launch party years ago. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone respectful. "I think we need to talk about your son." Privately, his voice lingered in my ear long after the call ended. A man like him didn't waste words, and the weight in his tone told me everything. I had leverage I hadn't even considered. Investors weren't sentimental. They cared about numbers, about stability, about the truth beneath the polish. And now, with the article spreading doubt, they were sniffing around for answers. Answers only I could provide. I met him 2 days later at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the same one where I had studied the loan papers weeks before. He was already seated when I arrived, a tall man with greying hair, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed too formal for the setting. He rose politely when he saw me, shaking my hand firmly before we sat. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, leaning forward. "There's been talk. Investors don't like uncertainty, and right now there's plenty of it. That article raised questions that could sink Carter Enterprises if they aren't answered. I need to know just how much of what he claims is true." I looked at him carefully, choosing my words with precision. Everything he has, his house, his business, even his reputation, was made possible because of me. Without my name, without my sacrifices, there would be nothing. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's what I suspected. There was no judgment in his voice, just calculation. And I realized then that he wasn't asking because he cared about my son's pride. He was asking because he wanted to know which way the wind was blowing, if he needed to pull out, if he needed to protect himself. For a flicker of a moment, I pitied my son. He thought his empire was built on loyalty and respect. He didn't realize that the very people he boasted to were the same people who would abandon him at the first sign of weakness. "I don't want to see his children suffer," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I won't lie anymore. If people ask, I'll tell the truth. I carried him to this point, and if he forgets that, he'll lose more than just money." The man nodded again, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. That's all I needed." He slid a card across the table. "If you ever feel there's more I should know, call me directly." I tucked the card into my bag, my hand steady though my heart was thudding. Another piece on the board, another crack in the foundation. When I returned home that evening, the phone was already ringing. My son. His voice, when I answered, was harsh, panicked. "What did you say to him?" I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight of his desperation sink in. "The truth," I said simply. "You're destroying me." He growled. "Do you understand that? You're tearing everything apart." "No," I whispered, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You destroyed us when you told me I wasn't welcome. You tore it apart the moment you chose to erase me. Now I'm just showing you what that feels like." On the other end of the line, silence. Heavy, broken silence. Then, with a strangled curse, he hung up. I stood in my small living room, staring at the faded family photos on the mantel. The boy he used to be smiled back at me from behind the glass. Innocent. Unknowing. My throat tightened. I had loved him more fiercely than I had ever loved anyone, and yet here I was, unraveling the man he had become. But it was too late to turn back. He needed to learn, even if the lesson burned us both. Days passed. More whispers spread through town. His wife stopped appearing at social events. The proud gleam in his eyes dulled. He was still fighting, still scrambling, but I knew the tide had shifted. And then, one evening, as I was preparing dinner, headlights swept across my window. A knock came at the door, softer this time, hesitant. When I opened it, he stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. "Mum," he said quietly. Not angry, not defiant, just tired. "Can I come in?" For a long moment I said nothing. The boy I raised was still somewhere inside this man, but whether he deserved forgiveness or just the final blow remained to be seen. He stepped inside like a stranger entering sacred ground, his eyes darting around my modest living room as though it had changed since the last time he was there. But nothing had changed. Same old furniture, same worn carpet, same photographs on the mantel. The only thing that had shifted was him. He looked smaller now, stripped of that confident shine he used to wear like armor. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders, his hair unkempt, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. I gestured towards the couch. "Sit." My voice was firm, not cruel, but commanding enough that he obeyed without question. He lowered himself onto the cushion, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. For a moment he didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the floor, the silence between us heavy with years of unspoken words. Finally, he whispered, "It's all falling apart, Mom." I didn't move. I didn't rush to comfort him, the way I once would have. I simply folded my arms and waited. He dragged a hand down his face, groaning. "The investors, they're pulling back. Clients are nervous. Everyone keeps asking questions I can't answer. And the worst part, she's blaming me." His voice cracked slightly, his pride warring with shame. "She says I let this happen, that I made us look weak. She doesn't even look at me the same way anymore." I raised an eyebrow, my words quiet but cutting. "Did you expect her to stay when the mask slipped?" "She married the image, not the man. And now that the image is cracking, so is her loyalty." His head jerked up, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, he looked like a child again, caught in the truth he couldn't deny. Then he slumped back down, shoulders caving inward. "I don't know what to do." A bitter laugh slipped from me before I could stop it. "Now you don't know what to do. After all these years of acting like I was nothing but baggage in your perfect life? After telling me I wasn't welcome in your home?" He winced, his lips parting, but no defense came. Just silence. I leaned forward, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "I built you, piece by piece. I sacrificed everything so you could stand tall. And when you had what you wanted, you turned your back on me. You let her push me out, you let your pride blind you, and now you're drowning in the very waters I once carried you across." His eyes glistened, the bravado gone. For the first time I saw something genuine. Regret. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 words. Small, fragile, late. And yet, they pierced through me like an arrow, because I had waited years to hear them, because some part of me, the part that still remembered his tiny hand clutching mine, had ached for them. But sorry wasn't enough. Not anymore. "You'll have to do more than say the words," I said coldly. "You'll have to prove them. To me, to your children, to yourself." He looked up at me, searching my face for mercy. "How?" I stood, moving toward the cabinet where the folders lay. I pulled them out, one by one, the weight of each document heavy in my hands. Mortgage, Loan, car, receipts. I dropped them onto the coffee table in front of him. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "You built your life on these?" I said. "On me. And now the world knows it. You want to fix this? Start by acknowledging it. Stop lying about being self-made. Stop pretending I didn't give you everything. Stand up in front of everyone and admit the truth." His face paled. "If I do that, they'll never respect me again." I leaned closer, my voice sharp as glass. "If you don't, you'll lose everything anyway. The difference is, if you tell the truth, at least you'll have a chance to rebuild. A chance to show your children what real strength looks like. Not pride, not image, but honesty." He stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the edges. I could see the war raging inside him, the desperate need to protect his ego clashing with the quiet, dying ember of humility. Minutes passed in silence. Then, with a shaky breath, he whispered, "I'll do it." I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I simply nodded. "We'll see." He rose slowly, clutching the folder like it was both a lifeline and a curse. At the door, he paused, turning back to me. His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Mum, will you be there?" "When I do it." I held his gaze, my heart twisting with emotions I didn't want to name. "That depends," I said softly, "on whether you mean it." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there for a long while, staring at the empty space where he had sat. For the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the wall I had built around my heart. Still, I wasn't naive. Words were cheap. Promises were fragile. The true test was still to come. He didn't return the next day or the day after that. I half expected him to vanish again, to let the silence stretch until everything we had spoken about dissolved into nothing. It wouldn't have surprised me. Cowardice runs deep in prideful men. But on the third evening, when the snow outside had frozen into icy ridges along the street, I heard another knock at my door. When I opened it, he stood there, not in his usual pressed coat and polished shoes, but in a sweater that looked wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Something in him had shifted. He didn't storm in this time. He didn't accuse or demand. He simply asked, "Can I come in?" I let him. He sat in the same place on the couch, but this time he held the folder of documents I had given him like it was an anchor. He placed it on the coffee table, pushed it toward me and said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right, I've lied. To everyone." To myself, the words came haltingly, like each one cost him more than he could afford. I thought if I admitted how much you'd done, people would think less of me. That they'd see me as weak, dependent. But now they see the truth anyway. And it's worse, because I didn't have the courage to say it myself. I studied him carefully, searching for the cracks in his voice. But this time, there was no arrogance, no sneer, just a man stripped of his illusions. "I want to fix it," he whispered. "I want to stand up and tell the truth. I'll do it at the shareholders' meeting next week. Everyone will be there, the investors, the staff, the press. I'll tell them all." He lifted his eyes to mine, pleading. "Will you come?" "Please?" I let the silence stretch, the weight of his request filling the room. My heart ached with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. Pride that he was finally willing to face his lies. Sorrow that it had taken so much pain to bring him here. At last I nodded. "If you're going to tell the truth, then yes." "I'll be there." Relief washed over his face, though his eyes still glistened with shame. He rose to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused. His voice trembled when he said, "Mum, Thank you. For everything. I don't know if I can ever make it up to you, but I'll try. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the quiet, staring at the space he had left. Part of me wanted to crumble into tears, to let the years of hurt wash away. But another part held firm. Words were still just words. Until I saw him stand before the world and acknowledge me, I wouldn't let my guard down. The week crept by slowly. Each day I imagined what it would feel like, sitting in that room, hearing him speak the truth out loud. Would he falter? Would he twist it into something half-true, to save face? Or would he finally give me what I had been denied all these years? Recognition. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not in anything flashy, but in a simple navy dress and my best coat. Dignified. Respectable. I wanted no one to mistake me for anything less than what I was, the backbone of the life they praised him for. When I arrived at the grand conference hall, people's eyes followed me as I walked in. Whispers spread quickly, the same whispers that had been swirling for weeks. That's his mother, the one from the article, the real story behind it all. Some eyes held pity, some curiosity, some admiration. I ignored them all. I sat near the front, my hands folded tightly in my lap as the room filled. Investors murmured among themselves, staff shuffled papers, reporters adjusted their cameras. And then he walked in. My son. Dressed sharply again, but not with the same arrogance. His face was pale, his steps measured. He stood at the podium, cleared his throat, and began. Thank you all for being here today. His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. I know there's been a lot of talk recently. A lot of questions about who I am, what I've built, and how I built it. And I think it's time I told you the truth. The room hushed. Cameras clicked. He glanced briefly in my direction, and then he spoke the words I had been waiting to hear for decades. I didn't build this alone. I didn't rise from nothing, self-made, as I've claimed. The truth is, I owe everything, my house, my business, my success, to someone who carried me when I had nothing, to someone who gave up her own life so I could have mine. My mother gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned toward me. My chest tightened, my vision blurred with tears I hadn't meant to shed. He continued, his voice stronger now. For years, I let pride convince me to hide her sacrifices, to pretend I did this all on my own. But the truth is, without her, there would be no me. And I need you all to know that. I need the world to know it. He paused, his voice breaking. Mum, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every time I pushed you aside, every time I let someone make you feel less than you are. You are the reason I stand here, and I will never forget that again. The room erupted in whispers, flashes of cameras. But all I heard was the sound of my son, finally, speaking the truth. The applause didn't come right away. At first, there was only stunned silence, the kind that fills a room when people aren't sure how to react. Then, slowly, a smattering of claps began from the back, spreading until the sound swelled around us. Investors, staff, even reporters joined in, though some faces were tight with skepticism. My son stood at the podium, his eyes locked on me, as if the approval of the crowd meant nothing compared to mine. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, tears drying on my cheeks. Part of me wanted to rise, to embrace him, to tell him the words I had withheld for so long, but another part of me, stronger, colder, reminded me this wasn't finished. A public confession was one thing. Redemption was another. When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed him. Questions fired from every direction. Why now? Why hadn't he acknowledged me before? Was his empire truly stable, or had it been a facade all along? He answered as best he could, voice steady but strained. And though he didn't falter, I saw the weight of humiliation in every tightened smile. I slipped out quietly, unnoticed in the chaos. I didn't need to speak. Not yet. My presence alone had been enough. That evening my phone buzzed with a call from him. His voice was raw, stripped bare. "Mom, I meant every word I said today. I don't care what it costs me. I want you back in my life, in the kids' lives, please." I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter, gripping the phone tightly. The ache in his voice tugged at me, but scars don't fade overnight. "We'll see," I murmured. "It'll take more than one speech to fix what's broken." He didn't argue. He only whispered, "I'll prove it," before hanging up. The next few days were a whirlwind. The article about his confession spread quickly, picked up by larger outlets. Some painted him as brave, a man finally admitting the truth. Others called him weak, exposed, no longer the golden boy. But through it all, my name appeared alongside his, no longer erased, no longer hidden. Then came the invitation. A formal one this time, not a careless text or a last-minute call. A hand-delivered card, embossed with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to the Carter family dinner." I almost laughed at the pomp of it, but when I opened it fully, I saw his handwriting scrawled at the bottom. "Please come. For me. For the kids." I hesitated for days. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to let him stew in his shame a little longer. But another part, the part that still remembered the boy with wide eyes and scraped knees, couldn't ignore it. And so on the evening of the dinner, I dressed simply but elegantly, my hair pinned neatly, my coat buttoned tight. When I arrived, the house glowed warmly in the winter night. For a moment I stood on the driveway, staring at the place that had once shut me out. Then I walked to the door and knocked. My grandson opened it, his face lighting up like a lantern. "Grandma!" he squealed, throwing his arms around me. Behind him, my granddaughter followed, smiling shyly, her small hand reaching for mine. My heart cracked open at the sight of them. Whatever bitterness I carried, it melted in their embrace. I kissed their heads, whispering, "I've missed you, my loves." And then I saw her. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway of the dining room, her smile tight, her eyes sharp. She didn't say a word, but her gaze spoke volumes. She hadn't forgiven me. She hadn't forgiven him. My son appeared beside her, his hand resting gently on her arm. "Mom," he said softly, his voice steady but hopeful. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, stepping inside. The air was thick with tension, but also with something else. Possibility. Dinner was awkward, stilted. The children chatted happily, oblivious, while the adults picked carefully through conversation. She spoke little, her fork clinking against her plate, her silence heavy as stone. He tried to bridge the gap, asking me questions, complimenting the food, smiling too much. And then, halfway through the meal, she snapped. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply, setting her fork down with a clang. "We're all pretending like nothing happened, like she didn't humiliate us in front of the entire town." The room went silent. My grandchildren froze, eyes wide. My son's face paled. I set my fork down calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I didn't humiliate you." I told the truth. If the truth humiliates you, perhaps you should ask why her cheeks flushed with fury. "You've ruined everything we worked for." Before I could reply, my son slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" His voice rang through the room, sharp, commanding. The children jumped. His wife stared at him in shock. She didn't ruin anything. We did. By pretending she didn't matter, by pretending I was something I wasn't, and I won't do it anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. She stared at him, betrayal in her eyes, before rising from the table and storming out of the room. The children sat frozen, unsure. My son looked at me, shame and resolve mingling in his eyes. "I won't lose you again," he said quietly. "Not to her. Not to my pride, not to anything." For the first time in years, I believed him. The door upstairs slammed, rattling the frame, and the sound echoed through the house like thunder. My grandchildren looked between me and their father, confusion clouding their innocent faces. I reached out, smoothing my grandson's hair, whispering softly, "It's all right, sweetheart." Grown-ups sometimes forget how to speak kindly. My son stood frozen by the table, his fists clenched at his sides, his chest rising and falling like he was trying to keep from exploding. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of us, until finally he drew a long, steadying breath and looked at me. "I'll talk to her later," he murmured, his voice low but firm. "But first, I want the kids to hear something." He turned to them, kneeling so his eyes met theirs. "Do you know why Grandma wasn't at Christmas?" They exchanged uneasy glances before my granddaughter shook her head slowly. "It wasn't because she didn't want to be there," he said, his voice gentle now, stripped of ego. "It was because I made a mistake. A big one. I told her not to come. I hurt her feelings. And I lied for a long time about how much she's done for me. The truth is, everything we have, this house, my business, even the car you used to love, it all came because of her, because of Grandma." Their eyes widened. My grandson whispered, "Really?" "Really," he said, nodding. "She gave up everything for me. And instead of saying thank you, I pretended I did it all myself. That was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." I felt tears sting my eyes again. Not the tears of rage or betrayal I'd grown used to, but something gentler, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Hope. My granddaughter looked at me then, her small voice breaking the silence. "We love you, Grandma. We always want you with us." The innocence in her words, the purity of them, undid me. I reached across the table, taking her hand, then my grandson's. "I love you too, more than anything in this world. And I'll always be here. No matter what." For a moment, we sat there, 3 generations bound together, and I almost forgot the storm raging upstairs. Almost. But when footsteps thundered down again, I remembered. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes sharp with fury. "So this is it?" she snapped. "You're just going to throw everything away for her?" My son rose slowly, standing tall, his expression hardening. "No," he said evenly. "I'm throwing away nothing. I'm finally holding on to the one person who never let me fall. If you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one throwing everything away." Her lips trembled, her glare flicking between him and me, and for the first time I saw fear there. Fear of losing her grip, fear of losing the story she had built for herself. She turned abruptly, muttering, "You'll regret this," before disappearing into the night with the slam of the front door. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, until my grandson whispered, "Daddy." He sighed, pulling both children into his arms. "It's going to be okay," he said, though his voice was tired. "We'll be okay." And then he looked at me. Really looked at me, not as a burden or an afterthought, but as the foundation I had always been. "If she doesn't come back, we'll manage. You and me, like we always did." Those words struck deep, unlocking a flood of memories. Nights in that old apartment, when it was just him and me against the world. My hand in his as we faced it all together. The circle, it seemed, had closed. I reached out, placing my hand on his shoulder. "Then let's do it right this time. No lies, no masks, just the truth." He nodded, eyes shining, and for the first time in years I felt the faintest warmth of peace. The storm wasn't over, but for once I wasn't standing in it alone. The new year arrived with an air of fragility, like the thin sheet of ice that forms over a pond, beautiful to look at, but dangerous to step on. My son called me almost every day now, sometimes to talk about the business, sometimes about the children, and sometimes about nothing at all. He seemed afraid that silence might grow into distance again. I listened, I answered, but I never let him mistake my patience for blind forgiveness. He needed to earn it, not just ask for it. His wife stayed gone. Rumors swirled through town. Some said she was staying with her parents, others whispered she was planning to file for divorce. I didn't concern myself with her choices anymore. She had spent years trying to erase me, and now she was erasing herself instead. Fitting, I thought, how lies eat their own. Meanwhile, the business limped forward. Investors hadn't fled entirely, but they watched closely now, their trust brittle. My son worked harder than I'd ever seen him, not just in meetings and contracts, but in the way he spoke. Carefully, humbly, acknowledging at every turn what he had once hidden. And though some sneered, others respected the change. People will forgive failure. What they won't forgive is arrogance. One evening he asked me to come to his office, not to scold or scheme or confess, but to help. The word stunned me. When I arrived, the conference table was scattered with papers, figures, proposals. He looked up at me, his eyes tired but earnest. "I don't want to make decisions without you anymore," he said quietly. "This was never just mine. Will you help me guide it? Not as a shadow, not as a secret." As my partner, I sat across from him, the weight of the moment pressing into me. For decades I had been the silent pillar, holding him up while he took the applause. Now, finally, he was offering me a seat at the table. "Yes," I said softly. "But if I do this, it won't be as your mother cleaning up your messes. It'll be as the woman who knows her worth. Are you ready for that?" He nodded without hesitation. "I am." It was strange, almost surreal, to sit there with him like equals, hashing out budgets and strategies, his pen scratching beside mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like an afterthought. I felt seen. But even as the days passed and things began to mend, the wound inside me still throbbed. Love and betrayal are not easily untangled. And late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sit by the window and wonder if true peace was possible, or if some scars never really heal. The answer came weeks later, in the form of a family gathering. This time, it wasn't Christmas or Thanksgiving. It wasn't about tradition. It was something new, something my son had organized himself. He called it a celebration of truth. When I arrived, the hall was filled with people, friends, colleagues, community members. At the center stood my son, his children by his side, a microphone in his hand. When he saw me, his face lit up with something pure, something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Pride, not in himself, but in me. He called me forward, his voice steady. "Everyone, I want you to meet the reason I stand here today. Not as a businessman, not as some self-made story, but as a man who owes everything to his mother." Applause thundered, louder than I expected, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I wasn't used to this, to being in the light instead of the shadows. But when my grandchildren tugged at my hands, grinning up at me, I let myself smile. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outcast. I didn't feel erased. I felt whole. Still, when the evening ended and the hall emptied, I pulled my son aside. I looked him in the eye, my voice quiet but firm. "Remember this feeling. Because if you ever forget again, if you ever make me invisible again, I won't forgive it twice." His face sobered, and he nodded. "I won't forget, Mom. Not ever again." And for once I believed him. The night air was crisp as we left the hall, laughter trailing behind us from the last of the guests. My son walked beside me, the children darting ahead, chasing one another through the snow-dusted parking lot. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like life had come full circle, like all those years of struggle, bitterness, and betrayal had led us back to something resembling family. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a circle. It was a scar, healed over but always there to remind us of what had been cut open. The weeks that followed were quieter. The town, once buzzing with whispers about the scandal, seemed to move on. People always do. Their attention shifted to newer gossip, fresher wounds to pick at. My son and I continued working together, side by side, his tone measured, his gratitude cautious but consistent. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever would be, but it was progress. One Saturday afternoon I sat in his house again, the house that once barred me at its door. The children pulled me into their games, their laughter filling rooms that had once felt cold and hostile. My son watched us from the doorway, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. When our eyes met, he mouthed a single word. "Thank you." Later, as I helped him clear dishes from the table, he spoke quietly, his hands busy with plates but his voice steady. "I don't know if I'll ever deserve your forgiveness, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying." I studied him for a moment, the lines of stress carved into his face, the humility in his posture. Finally, I placed a hand on his arm. Deserve is a hard word, but effort I can respect. Just don't stop trying. He nodded, and for once I believed the promise wouldn't be broken. His wife never returned. Papers were filed, lawyers involved, but I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching a marriage unravel, even if she had been the architect of my exile. All I felt was a cold certainty. She had underestimated me, underestimated the truth, and now she lived with the consequences of her choices. In the stillness of my own home, I often reflected on how close I had come to losing myself entirely, to being erased not just from their lives, but from the story of everything I had built. Revenge had brought me justice, yes, but more importantly, it had forced the truth into the open. It had given me back my name, my place, my dignity. And yet I couldn't ignore the cost. My son's pride was shattered, his marriage gone, his image tarnished. But maybe that was the only way. Sometimes the truth has to break before it can mend. Sometimes family has to fall apart before it remembers what it really means. One evening, as I tucked my letter to the grandchildren deeper into a drawer, saving it for when they were older, I found myself whispering aloud, "Real family isn't who you're related to. Real family is who stands beside you when the storm comes." I had stood beside my son his whole life, even when he cast me into the shadows. And in the end, through pain and fire, he had finally chosen to stand beside me. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was enough. Enough to quiet the ache, enough to let me breathe again. And as the snow melted and the first buds of spring pushed through the frozen ground, I felt something inside me thaw too. Not forgiveness, not completely, but peace. For once, I no longer felt like the forgotten mother, the invisible sacrifice. I felt seen, and that, after everything, was its own kind of revenge.